Okay, my name is Pete Fleischman. I'm Head of Co-Production at the Social Care Institute for Excellence. It's great to see so many of you here on such a sunny day, and great to see that we've got people from all over the country, including Jersey, Wales, Rotherham, Northampton. We've got a weather report from Durham. There's somebody from Northern Ireland here, Pembrokeshire, and somebody from Canada as well. And we've also got the fire brigade in, which is handy. So I'd just like to introduce my two colleagues who are here with me.
Hi, so I'm Catherine Goodall and I work at the Council for Disabled Children. So we're a children's charity that's based in London.
And I'm Sid Jiwa and I'm from Northampton and I'm a member of the Co-Production Equalities and Human Rights Steering Group. I'll be talking about that a bit later.
Great. So, like all good meetings, we have to do a bit of housekeeping first. So, we've got Steve here who's going to be helping us with the technology and to run some questions. And you'll see the chat screen where you've already started talking to each other. But just be aware if you do share your emails, this is out on the internet and it's not private, and also we're going to be recording it, so there is a recording if people want to share that, that will be available. Then at various points we're going to give you the chance to do some polls, so we'll be asking you a question, but you'll see that in a minute. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover, we're going to just talk quite briefly about what co-production is, some definitions, and just talk about some principles of co-production. Then a little bit about why accessible meetings are a vital part of co-production. Then a little bit about learning from two groups that sometimes people are perceived to be quite hard to involve. That's children and young people and people with learning difficulties. Then we're going to kind of try and bring it all together with an example of one of the meetings that we run, the Co-Production Equality, Diversity and Human Rights Steering Group, which involves people from a wide range of different impairments, disabilities and requirements, and how that works. And then we're going to tell you a little bit about the training course that we're going to be holding on the 17th of October, which is a more in-depth and longer version of this session. So, one way of thinking about co-production is, an easy way of thinking about it is nothing about us without us. And I think that's a really good way of explaining co-production in a nutshell, and thinking that if there's something that concerns people who use services, or disabled people, or mental health service users, or whatever group you're working with, you shouldn't do anything about them without them. At SCIE we use this definition: people who use services and carers working with professionals in equal partnership to design and deliver and evaluate services. And I think the key words there are equal partnerships. Yeah. So, but often, in a sense, it's easier to think about co-production rather as a definition, as a set of values or principles. So SCIE has 4 co-production principles that we use. Before I go into the principles, just wanted to be clear about when we talk about people who use services, what we're talking about are people who require long-term support from social and health care services. And that includes people who need or are likely to need services but are not currently using them. And then when we talk about carers, we're talking about carers are people who are providing unpaid support for others who could not manage without this help. And they're usually family members or partners, but they could be neighbours or close friends of the person that they support. And I think this is really important because sometimes people use the phrase co-production a little bit loosely, and it's like if 2 organisations are collaborating, they're talking about co-producing a policy or something, or a project. But unless citizens are involved or people that use services, then I wouldn't think of it as co-production. So our 4 principles of co-production are equality, and that's about power sharing, and that's about recognising that usually people who use services and carers have less power and resources than professionals. And so co-production is really the process of trying to make it a level playing field and trying to equalise the difference in power so that everybody can contribute on an equal basis, and also recognising that everybody has something to contribute. So then the next principle is diversity. So it's really important that we've got that we don't exclude anybody for reasons of gender or religion, race or sexuality, and to really think about proactively how do we engage that, or the different sort of participants and go beyond just the sort of the usual people that we might find it easy to involve.
And it's great, isn't it, to have diversity, because people will always think of something you've never thought of before. They've got a different view of the world, and it's really helpful to make sure that you're capturing different people's views and voices.
Get the wider perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, diverse meetings are really exciting and diverse and fun and interesting. So then there's third principle is accessibility. We'll be talking about this a lot today, but it's really important because some people just can't participate at all unless you've sort of thought through access, and that might be flat access for people who use wheelchairs, but it might be around easy read in different formats, or it might be the timings of meetings because people are working or are taking medication and don't do well in the morning. But it really isn't an added extra. It's absolutely sort of.
I think it's also important to remember that when we talk about access, it's not just purely access. We're talking about inclusion, because sometimes there can be access but not inclusion in a meeting setting. So I think it's important to bear in mind.
And then finally, a bit of a jargon word, and we did have some discussion in our steering group about whether this should become one of our principles, but you do hear this word often in connection with co-production, and it did take me a while to learn how to pronounce it, but now I'm getting quite good. So it's reciprocity, but it really simply means if you put something in, you get something out, and so it's rewarding people for their contribution and thinking about how to do that. And that might be through payments, it might be through training, it could be through more networking opportunities or certificates that people can put on their CVs, or time banking. But I mean, it's really important to not to take people's contributions for granted, really.
Yeah.
And it's
sorry, Peter, I'm going to say it's about taking that reward a bit further. It's actually valuing what they're contributing.
And it's also, reciprocity is also about an exchange of ideas as well. So sort of like everybody's got something to contribute. So, so in some senses, co-production is a simple concept, but actually it's quite difficult to and complicated to put into practice, and to think about how can we put it into practice and what practical skills, knowledge and understanding is needed. So today we're going to look at meetings and co-production, and that's because meetings are really usually at the heart of any co-production project. You need to bring people together to manage the project, to direct it, to think about what the project should do, how's it doing, to keep an eye on it. So meetings are really, really important, but sometimes we don't think carefully enough about the meetings that we're holding. So, so this is a picture of a typical meeting, or not a typical meeting, but an inaccessible meeting where probably access hasn't been thought about at all. Then there's the participants aren't very diverse. One of them looks very bored. Not everybody has turned up. and they all seem to be having their own conversations rather than sort of like listening to each other. And I think if I was to come into that meeting, it would be rather an intimidating experience. So we're really today thinking about how to do this differently, but I imagine that nearly everybody listening has possibly been to a meeting a bit like that one, because they're not that rare. I think we three certainly have. But so what we want to do is just do 2 polls now. Steve?
I want to hear from you about what your experiences are as well about meetings.
Yeah. So the polls are just going to come onto your screen just shortly. Okay, so just make it big. Great. Okay, so we just want to know whether you agree, strongly agree, neither disagree, neither agree nor disagree, or strongly disagree with this statement. I've been in a meeting and did not feel able to express my views.
Oh, brilliant. People are straight away.
Okay, yeah, we're certainly getting a lot of people agreeing and quite a few
Strongly.
strongly agreeing.
Yeah, we had a suspicion that might be the
Yeah.
might be a common experience for you all.
I still go to quite a few meetings where I, as a service user, feel that I can't contribute or feel uncomfortable. And you know, I've been doing this for the last 20 years. And, you know, it's still there. It's all
Okay,
practice.
So we're just going to put the next poll up. So we've found that it's a pretty common experience to be able to express yourself in a meeting. So the second one is, the second statement is, I've been in a meeting and I did not understand fully what was going on.
So again, you've got the agree, strongly agree. You can neither agree nor disagree. You can disagree or strongly disagree.
Yeah, same sort of thing.
I don't know about you, but if you walk in and everyone starts saying acronyms and company names and projects you've never heard of and forms, you don't know what they are.
Or in the health profession, start using jargon of abbreviations and things.
I think also not introducing you as well. Sometimes you can go into a meeting, sit down, and everyone seems to know each other, and you're the only one that doesn't know anyone. And sort of like, so yeah, it's a pretty strong result there again. I think that. So obviously we don't know makeup of the group of people, that the participants in this webinar, but I imagine that not everybody has disabilities or are service users. So what that goes to show is that it's everybody who finds meetings inaccessible, really. And so what we're talking about is a way of making meetings better for everybody.
It is. But then you've got, in addition to that, when people have impairments or different conditions, that's on top of that situation. So it's like a double jeopardy, if you like.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that much harder. Right. So basically, what we're going to try and do is apply those principles of co-production to meetings. So now I'm going to pass over to Catherine.
So hi everyone. Yeah. So I work at the Council for Disabled Children. So we do we're an umbrella body of charities for disabled children, and we do a lot of different work with disabled children and young people. And so we're just going to talk about making meetings accessible and doing co-production with children and young people. So obviously this is a really big topic. We're just doing a few kind of key principles today. And I think my main point at the beginning is it's really important to plan effectively. So when we're talking about meetings, we kind of feel like meetings are the first step. But but actually there's a lot of work that goes into creating meetings that are meaningful and that actually can support co-production, and we'll all be touching on that today. And these little quote boxes that we've got are from one of the resources that we've created with children and young people that I'll be talking about later, and we've got a link to later. But the young people were really clear that professionals need to adapt meetings to make young people feel confident to take part, on top of being able to take part in the first place. So if we're thinking about a project and how we make it meaningful, how we can do co-production with children and young people, right at the beginning we'll need to be thinking about, does the project meet their needs? So I think we can think that we're going to do some work that will be really helpful for children and young people, but we really need to check that that's what they want and that's what they need. We need to think about whether or not they'll be interested in taking part. I think we think our projects are all really exciting and interesting, but actually whether or not a young person would be quite so keen, I don't really know. So we really need to check that kind of thing at the beginning. And thinking through what we'll need to do to help them take part, and that's really what we're looking at today. And that kind of planning at the beginning makes it so much easier to design those meetings which are supportive later on, and makes your project a lot better and a lot better quality in the long run. So if we're thinking about what we might need to do to make a meeting accessible, if we've already planned and we're fairly certain children and young people want to be part of our project in the first place. So I think that no jargon one would be my top tip. I think everything else is really important, but if you do all of these things and you get in the room and you start talking jargon, it's gonna put everyone off straight away. But if we're thinking about making a meeting accessible, the timing's really important. Are we trying to have a meeting at 3 p.m. when children and young people will be at school? Are we trying to have it on at 7 o'clock at night when a lot of children and young people might be getting really tired? We really need to think that through so it's supportive. The venue, we'll talk in a bit more detail later about accessible venues, but thinking about whether it's really off-putting for a child or young person is quite important. If we want them to go to a council building, say, or a hospital or a school, is it accessible and will they be happy with going there? Who will be there is really important as well. So do the children and young people know who will be in the room, and do they have information about that before? Giving them clear information about what's expected, what's going to happen when they walk in that room, what are they going to be asked to do. And as Pete was saying earlier about power dynamics, thinking about power dynamics, if we walk into that room and we see that meeting image and you're 12 or you're 15, is that going to make you feel really powerless? Is it going to make you feel like you're supported? And again, accessibility, we'll talk through a bit more about that in the long run. But if we're thinking about preparing for the meetings before we even get there, so accessible papers and agendas are really, really important. So letting them know what the meeting's about, what's going to happen, what the timing will be, what's expected of them or what they might benefit from. And making sure that information is in a variety of different ways. So you can do lots of different things. You don't just have to send an email with a sheet of paper that just says some bullet points on it. You can do video, explanations of what the meeting's going to be like. If you've done a similar sort of meeting in the past, sometimes videos and audios and photos can be really helpful to show what that's going to look like. And easy read's really important. If you're giving complex information, it really needs to be accessible. We need to check that children and young people are going to understand it. I think that jargon buster comes up again of, if we do have to talk about jargon, if we have to say about a service or an acronym for something, that making sure there's a list that's really clear, that young people have information before they turn up, and that they know that they're not expected to be experts in a system before they come. And I think having breaks and games is really important. So we were talking about this earlier, of what kind of breaks, what kind of games. So kind of short breaks to break up the talking, to break up the activities. We quite often run groups with disabled young people where we've got lots of tables set up in the room that have sort of materials. They've got fidget spinners and bits of toys and games to play with, as well as post-its and various different toys and activities they can do, as well as alongside the big activities we're trying to get them to do, and making sure that there's breakout spaces as well. Giving refreshments is always a top tip, so we were talking about that before. So pizza always goes down a treat. But I also think it's really important to make sure that we've got sort of healthy snacks, fruit, lots of water, lots of different drinks and things to break up, and that children and young people know they can go and get a snack or a refreshment when they need one, and they're not sitting and waiting.
And I'd imagine also like know that you can just leave at any time. You know, you don't have to sort of put your hand up to go to the loo and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that comes back to that power sharing, doesn't it? If we're saying that at the beginning of the meeting or at the beginning of the activity, then actually you give them back some of that power. We're not teachers. We're not in charge. We're just trying to help them to co-produce something new. And then, so at the meeting, I think it's really important that we're making sure everyone gets a chance to have their views listened to, that we're supporting people to talk what they want to, or to, record what they want to say. Maybe if they've got a communication device, making sure that they've got a chance to use that. Making sure, we talked about this before, that there's a chair of the meeting is really important, and Sid will talk about that in a few minutes. But they're really helpful for keeping the meeting on track. So as much as we want fun activities and we want to make it accessible, we want there to be a point, we want actions to come out of these meetings. And keeping points short and explaining issues quite clearly, it's really helpful, I think, to try to think through things like in a PowerPoint kind of concept, that you try not to put lots of words on the screen, you try not to talk endlessly about something, which I might do, but explaining what you mean as you go along.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point about making sure that the meeting's effective as well, that there's sort of actions, because otherwise people do get frustrated if it just feels like it's just a talking shop. So it's got to sort of move on and, be meaningful.
Yeah, purpose, yeah.
Yeah, we want to do something, don't we? We want to achieve something. And I think after the meeting's a really important thing to think about with children and young people, and actually all of us really, of making sure there's a summary of what happened on the day that goes round. Asking for feedback. So I think we'll do that in this webinar, right? We do it in our meetings on the day, sort of how did that go? Did you like anything? Did you not like anything? But I think with children and young people, it's also really important to give them a time to reflect after the session, and maybe catch up with them a few days later, see how they feel, and make sure that they've had time to think through what happened, what they got to do. Maybe they would want to say, next time I would want to be able to do something a bit differently. Keeping them informed of what happens next and any outcomes is really important, so they don't just think, oh, I came along to that really fun day that one afternoon and then nothing ever happened. And any next steps, so if you want them to come back for anything, if they're going to create something out of those meetings. And then that final point of making sure you're adapting your future meetings based on their feedback. So if someone says, actually, that was really hard for me, we're trying really hard to make sure that doesn't happen again, or that we're thinking through a different way we could do it in the future.
Yeah, just in the spirit of that, I think I just wanted to check everyone can hear me and Sid, because there's somebody commented that we were too far away from the mics. But we're good? Okay, good. Okay, so...
So yeah, there's just some more information that's available in these, because you'll get the slides and on our website. So we've got various different resources and fact sheets that children and young people have created that explain how to help them in participation, how to help them co-produce different activities. One of them is a fact sheet about involving children and young people in formal meetings, which is where I got all those little yellow text box from, because they were quotes from children and young people themselves.
Great. Okay, so we were hoping to have a colleague called Cecilia Mercer, who has a learning difficulty, to do this bit, but unfortunately she's not well today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about making meetings accessible for people with learning difficulties. So obviously the information needs to be an easy read. So some of these slides are kind of easy read. So using simple words, no jargon, and using pictures. Try to talk clearly and not too quickly. Send information to people before the meeting. This is so they have got time to read it, understand it, and prepare what they want to say in the meeting. So that's really important for people with learning difficulties. They may need to work with the supporter to sort of prepare what they're the points that they will actually want to make. So they do need the information in advance. We use traffic light cards, so people have cards that they can hold up to say, please stop, I can't understand, or I want to speak, and they're very useful. People with learning difficulties can often be quite shy, and so they're quite scared in a way to say that they don't understand something. That can be because they feel uncomfortable slowing people down. So it's really important to be particularly sort of friendly and inviting and have positive body language and to be patient and give people time to say what they need to say.
And I think that here there's an important role for the chair to sort of be aware of these things and to actually give people the opportunity. And actually, some people can be shy in speaking out, but if you're given the opportunity, like, is everybody okay with what we've just discussed? So it gives people that, you know, the permission, if you like, isn't it?
And also, if you've got a mixed group, some people without learning difficulties, sometimes if people are getting a bit passionate and engaged, then they can sort of like start,
as we tend to do at our meetings sometimes.
Yeah, sort of then the sort of less, you know, not using jargon and using more complicated language kind of comes in. So it's up to the chair to try to sort of like say, could you just slow down and explain what you were saying?
And I think there's a point, someone's also said you might not realise you don't understand or know how to ask for something to be explained differently. And I think that's a good point, because we were reflecting previously on meetings, if I've piped up and said, oh, actually, I'm not sure I understand what we're talking about, it tends to be that a few other people feel the same.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
It's really helpful if someone says that they don't understand something, because the likelihood is they're not the only one.
Yeah.
It's probably something common.
It is you have to be quite brave to do that. And I think I can imagine that if you have a learning difficulty, it's that's even more difficult. Again, breaks are important. Understanding that people have different needs. To keep reminding people that if they don't understand anything, they should say. And also that people need support to prepare for the meeting and in the meeting, and that support needs to be paid for.
Okay, hi everybody. And I'm going to talk about a real life sort of example of an accessible and inclusive meeting, something that we try to do here at SCIE. My apologies. My apologies at SCIE. And it's the Co-Production Equalities and Human Rights Steering Group meeting that we have. Just a bit of background about the group. The steering group works with SCIE.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To make sure that co-production, equality, diversity and human rights is part of everything it does. This includes ensuring that SCIE's work is accessible to all. The group is made up of a wide range of people with sort of different impairments and conditions, including people with learning difficulties, people on the neurodiverse spectrum, people with mental health service users, etc. Younger people representation. And the group also includes management, SCIE management and board representation. And I won't go through all of those sort of terms of reference, but some of the things that the group does is review progress on SCIE's equality and human rights objectives, reviews progress on the co-production strategy, and we tend to have up to about 6 meetings a year. But in terms of this particular meeting, I feel it works effectively, really well. Sorry, I'm just nudging Pete here. Move the slides on
listening
forward,
intently.
Yeah, I'm listening.
I feel that what really makes this meeting work well is the pre-meeting supported information that we have. It sets up for the meeting to be fully accessible and inclusive. When we talk about fully accessible, nothing is truly fully accessible and inclusive, and we're always aware of that. So, and we're always trying to improve. So, we do, and I'll come to this anyway. We do sort of look at, in terms of rooms and venues, other alternatives, because it cannot always meet everyone's access needs. But that's something that you need to be aware of. That trying to pack everything in can actually be quite difficult, and also create more barriers. So we haven't got the answer as such. We've
got some of the answers.
Some of the answers, not perfect.
Yeah, we're not perfect.
So in terms of the pre-meeting, we need to think about sort of the accessibility, the venue and the room. And here at SCIE, we tend to have the meetings here, but we do vary it. So maybe once a year or twice a year, we'll have it at an external venue, which enables other people to participate that can't at SCIE sometimes. But I'll come to the other ways they can access the meeting. So the things, when you're thinking about choosing a location or venue, you need to be aware of things like, is it near to public transport? Does it have accessible parking? Is there lift access to the meeting area? Is there an accessible toilet nearby? Is it in a quiet location without background noise and poor acoustics? And if you are trying to, find an external venue, obviously it's a good idea to visit the venue to check out the suitability for your particular meeting. And then we come to things like previous. No, if you go back a bit. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I did not share. Previous minutes and things. So information that pre-meeting information. We receive it in time, and so
it's always a week in advance. We've got like a iron rule about that,
and that is really, really, because it gives people read and do things in their own way, in different at different pace, etc. For some people, they need to have, as Pete mentioned earlier, they might need a support worker to help them go through the previous minutes and actions, etc. So it gives them time to prepare. For me, I need to read things through 2 or 3 times. And having the meetings notes helps me to do that. And it's also about being available in different formats as well, if required. Yeah. And the colleagues here, when they are sort of preparing for the meetings here, they're always checking out for our individual support needs. So some people need help with arrangements like transport, so trains and taxis, etc. So that it's important. What other reasonable adjustments might they require in order to access the meeting? Some people might need induction loops. Other people who might not be able to attend for whatever reason on the day might want to dial in. So we have the SCIE facility. So this is the SCIE one we use here. Yeah. So, but it's another way they can participate. And I've done that in the past where I've woken up on the day and my condition has meant that actually I'm in aches and pains, but it still enables me to dial into the meeting. So
yeah. I mean, there's somebody called Alice was asking, do we find there's a problem with cancellations? But I'd say we have pretty good turnouts usually, because people can dial. People have the option to dial in, but also because we send out the schedule of meetings like 6 months in advance, so everybody's got the dates and they know those dates. So we get pretty good turnouts, and because the meetings are engaging as well, I think people enjoy them. They don't want to miss them.
Yeah. And then we often hear about the dietary requirements, and it's not just about vegetarian, etc., which is equally as important, but might be around things like gluten-free or those sorts of diet, catering needs, etc. needs to be arranged.
Okay, can I go?
Yes.
Thank you.
With our meeting, it's usually held between 11 and 3, and that's a sort of a reasonable time and length for a meeting. And I think I've been to plenty of meetings where they start around 9 and continue until 4 o'clock, etc. It's too much for a lot of people, you know. But with this, we have a good sort of time for lunch break, and we also ensure that there are comfort breaks. So that's important. Having just these comfort breaks that people can just, have a few minutes to recuperate, etc.
One of our members said that, didn't she? She's got Ehlers-Danlos, and she said that she needs to stand up every so often and move around, and that it makes it a bit easier to do that with a good break. It makes it a bit less scary to stand up and walk around.
And that's a good point, Catherine, because we're talking about ground rules and things. Put things in the ground rules that say if you feel like you need to just take a little break, please just do so. If you need to feel like you want to walk around the room, etc., it's about encouraging people to be who they are, really. I think that's important.
And it keeps the meeting lively. When people, at first I was a bit sort of like when people got up and I was chairing the meeting, and it was a bit distracting, but then I think it just sort of keeps you awake in a way, and it's quite got used to it, quite like it.
And the other issue about starting late, because we do start late at 11 o'clock. I mean, some people might be difficult for them to sort of get in earlier. They might have public transport issues, and it's quieter to get in. There might be support workers can't be with them until later on in the day. So there needs to be flexibility around this. What's the next one? Papers. We talked about this. We mentioned before about easy read, etc., and that kind of thing. It's coming up. We're coming up to access law, but I think important are ground rules. Ground rules are really important in terms of making someone feel comfortable and inclusive in a meeting. And I won't go through all our ground rules, but he's trying to find his examples of some ground rules. I'll read through a couple of them. It's about respect each other, listen to what people have to say, value other members' perspectives, and be prepared to learn from each other. Yeah, because people are bringing in different experiences. And one thing we don't try and do is actually label people by their conditions. And it's important to do that, so not assume that just because someone might have hearing impairment, that their access needs will be similar to another person with hearing impairments. So we don't assume that, I
think that's really helpful as well, isn't it? Because when people say, "Oh, I don't know what to do to help someone," well, of course you don't until you ask them.
Exactly.
And there is no one answer for anyone, is there, for anything?
Yeah. And then I think you've got to make sure that the changes that you make in terms of access is like, it depends on the participants. So that if you haven't got people with learning difficulties, then you don't want to spend lots of time doing easy read. It's got to be tailored to the participants.
Yeah. So for meetings from more than one impairment group and or diverse range of people who use services, it is particularly important to develop ground rules that everyone agrees with and can work to. And that's about developing them together, not imposing ground rules on people. Yeah.
And someone else has said if anyone wants to add any of their own, then that's
right.
really important.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think it's been mentioned before, but to what was said, is creating a friendly and relaxed atmosphere for a meeting is about making it inclusive and accessible, and ground rules do help to do this. And it's something that everybody is aware of, so it's not just the chair's responsibility to actually, state the ground rules. It's everybody else's responsibility in that room to be responsible to each other and understand each other's access needs. Where are we next? Access slots. This is a really good bit we have in our meetings, usually at the beginning, whereby a member of the group might do a 20-minute session on sort of a training session on informing others about their own particular access needs. So they might talk about what was the recent one that was really interesting there? Yes, that one, where we did a little task. We were set a task whereby we had to talk in pairs, talk to each other in pairs, but there was a lot of background noise going on, and through lights, switches, or whatever, background talk, etc. And the point was really is that for some people with the neurodiverse conditions, there's a lot going on that can be quite difficult for them to sort of focus on one thing. So it was really about slowing things down and, understanding that they might need a bit more time to sort of focus or concentrate, or there might be times where they just actually, as it was said by themselves, they might just wander off in their mind for a few minutes, but that's okay.
And I think that's really important as well. Sorry, we're getting a time update, which is helpful. I think that access slot thing is really helpful, because even if we learn about something once, even if we learn about someone's access needs once, we're all human. Everybody sort of forgets. Like Pete said, when you get really excited about something, or you're having a really passionate debate about something, that sometimes it can be hard to think about different access needs, particularly if people have competing access needs. We've had that in the steering group before, that one person's access need might be slightly different to another, and it might have a bit of an impact on each other. So those kinds of things are really helpful to keep reminding us how we need to behave and what we need to do.
We've got a question from somebody who says, who is responsible for paying for reasonable adjustments? So,
signers and things.
Yes.
As an example, the SCIE would pay for those sorts of things. Reasonable adjustments aren't usually that sort of. It's just a different way of doing something, aren't they?
If you have to, we budget, for our meetings when we know that we're going to, you have to budget and try and work out if you're going to hold an accessible meeting. It's probably going to have some costs attached to it for support, and you just have to build that into the budget, really. And whoever you're getting the money from, you have to kind of persuade them that that's a reasonable and a cost of the project, because the project's not, you just can't involve some people without some costs, really. So.
I'd say a lot of. So there are some reasonable adjustments that will be very expensive, and that is part of the course for that person. But an awful lot of these adjustments we're talking about are free or very, very cheap. There is some. So if you have to pay for a signer for the day, that is going to be costly. But I think a lot of what we're talking about are fairly simple principles, and once you get used to doing them, once it becomes routine and how you do your meetings, they're not quite as daunting, not quite as costly, not quite as challenging to put in place.
We use a sort of checklist, so that because the meetings are really quite complicated, we've got a lot of things to think about. So,
but it's important not to see, reasonable adjustments, etc., as barriers. I think, and a way, as a way of not saying that we can't do this because. You've got to see it as a sort of a positive way. So, okay, how can we be inclusive? What do we need to do? We need to build it into our planning or something.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's a really, really important point, because the point of what we're doing is learning from each other, is making services work for people, and we can't do that if we're not involving them. I think that's the key point of we need to be prepared for supporting people to take part in whatever they need and however they need to be supported.
A few people are asking, what about how to make meetings accessible for people with complex needs? But I'm not quite sure. I don't know quite sure what complex needs means. It could mean a few different things.
Yeah. An example. Not an example. But I don't know whether this person means it in this way, but I go to a meeting where we have several people with speech impairments, and we sort of, in our ground rules and things, we do try and we state that people can take as much time as they need, etc. But some people find the silence is quite uncomfortable, but it's about recognising that, and recognising that that person, in order for them to be able to participate, they need to they may have a communication machine where they need to type out their sentence, and that takes time. But that's about learning about other people's differences and access needs. I don't know about what sort of if that, some people define that as complex or something like that.
And I think there's a. I think it's a.
Sorry, we just our screen's just gone.
Sorry, we're just I do think it's a really important point that actually that if someone has really complex needs, the work that you have to do to support them to do co-production is really specific based on their needs. And I think, like Pete was saying, we'll have a checklist to check people's needs and to make sure we're putting support in place. But the chances are you will have to put really bespoke support in for someone who has really complex additional needs. So it's kind of hard to sort of say you should do X. And I think one of the key things I think I learned from our steering group is actually there is no one way of doing this. There's lots and lots and lots of ways, and everyone's different, and everyone needs different levels of support. So it's kind of a bit of an unhelpful answer. But
yeah, I mean, somebody's saying profound and multiple needs, but I think that the principle's always the same. If possible, to talk to people and ask them what would help, and then talk to them as a group, and maybe in the early project meetings, if it's a project, spend a lot of time just talking through, like we talked about the times that we were going to hold the meetings, and we talked about a whole range of things in the early stages. And then I think the members' reviews is another thing.
Yes, we should do that. Yeah. Just going back to at the end of the meeting, and Catherine mentioned this in her talk, it is important to reflect on the meeting and see how it went for people, what needs to be improved, and what can we incorporate at the next meeting. So always constantly learning. And again, that's similar to the members' review, because we have each member of the group has an annual sort of review just to see how things are going for them, how they're feeling when they're as a participant of the meeting, etc. So if they feel uncomfortable in speaking at the meeting, they can also speak outside the meeting or in the members' reviews. So there's different opportunities there. Payments, it's always good if you can try and pay travel expenses on the day. Some people are cash starved, etc. So, I know it's not always possible, but we do have the opportunity here where a member of staff comes in and pays people their travel expenses, as long as invoices are provided.
Yeah, so we're paying travel in cash on the day, actually on the day. Yeah.
Also, I think payments, in principle, if you're asking someone for something, you should be paying them for their time. It's their knowledge and their expertise that you need to make the service better, and as far as possible. So for children and young people, we do lots of different things depending on what they might need. But someone's mentioned it in the chat box, but high street vouchers, paying towards a group. So if they're part of a youth group, putting money in a kitty to support them to do activities. There are different options of ways of paying people and supporting people.
And it's also, as mentioned earlier, it's about valuing people's expertise. A lot of us go to these meetings and we're with people, professionals, who are being paid to attend those meetings. Why shouldn't we? Equal value.
Yeah, it's a basic principle of equality. I mean, a few people are talking about the issues around paying people who receive benefits, and we do a separate training course which is all about that, because it is quite a complicated issue, but there are ways around it to a certain extent.
I'm sorry, it's such a short webinar, we're trying to cover everything, but inevitably means we're leaving a lot of questions.
Okay. So we have a product making events accessible, which I think is quite useful, and we created that in quite an innovative way, because it was originally a wiki document, and then lots of people kind of chipped in, and then we edited it all together. So it is quite a co-produced guide to making events accessible, and it covers a whole diverse range of different impairments. So on the 17th of October, we're going to hold a full-day training course in our office in Baker Street, holding accessible and inclusive meetings, and that's going to be a much more in-depth and sort of interactive look at this issue. So we're also going to be, we want to run the training session as if it's a meeting, so it's a sort of experiential kind of learning. But we'll go right through all the issues around recruiting group members, building trust, getting to know the group, thinking about what training and support people will need, getting the terms of reference right, because that terms of reference is a little bit kind of boring in a way, but very, very useful so that everybody knows the purpose of the meeting, how you can sort out any problems if people aren't working to the ground rules, how long people are on the group, how do they get on the group, etc. Chairing, very important, we've talked about that, ground rules, what about accessible meeting papers, and then thinking about some of the common problems and how to overcome those. So that's open for booking now. And so I think, and the other thing we want to remind people about as well, at 7 o'clock tonight there's a hashtag CoProChat. There's a Twitter event which is another opportunity to talk about some of these issues, but it's all about sharing power. We've also, because it's co-production week, we've got co-production podcast, we've got a new report breaking out the barriers, and we've also launched a survey, and they're all on our homepage at sci.org.uk. So before we finish, we've just got a couple more poll questions, just because we wanted to kind of make this a little bit like sort of a small way of reflecting on was the webinar useful.
But because there's 124 of you right now, we figured if we asked you all individually, we might not be able to answer your question.
So the question is: I found this webinar useful. Agree strongly. Agree. Neither disagree. Disagree. Strongly disagree. And
if you don't find it useful, it'd be really helpful as well to tell. Well, I mean, if you do or if you don't. But if you didn't find it useful for any particular reason, please do let us know in the chat box, because it's always helpful for us to think through how we can do things differently.
And that's going to inform the training course that we'll hold on the 17th.
I mean, obviously we like hearing positive feedback too, but it can help us change a lot more if we hear. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Okay, and the next poll is a bit bigger, please, Steve. Sure, you're on it.
Steve's on it.
So the next one is: I will be able to use the information from this webinar to help me make meetings more accessible.
The chat box isn't playing. So again, do you think you'll be able to use what you've heard today and what you've read?
Oh, nice positive results again. Don't be shy if you.
It would
be great to sort of like. We will look at the comments as well, just to sort of.
That's a good point, actually, about more insight into actual co-production in practice. I think so. Maybe we weren't as clear on that at the beginning, but this was very much focused on meetings itself, because CoPro Week and a lot of the work that SCIE is doing talks about co-production more generally, and talks about a lot of the other ways of doing it. But that's a good point.
But for co-production, you have to have meetings, and the meetings have to be shared. You have to share power in meetings, and that's.
Hope there'll be more webinars to come in the future. Well, that's a great bit of feedback.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, and staying with us for the whole time. Great.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. Thank you very much, guys.
We'll see some of you for the training session.
Thank you. So we'll say goodbye. But thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, and thanks, Steve.
And thank you, Steve.
And thanks, Steve. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.